Thanks, Rosa, for that introduction. And Joni, wonderful to hear of the story that was taking place in your neck of the woods. I'm going to share my screen just because, not that I've got a whole bunch of content to share in slides, but I thought I'd share some lovely photographs in case your afternoon is starting to get a bit long on that front. You can look at these beautiful, beautiful photographs from across the country. So as Rosa mentioned, my name is Ryan Gibson. I am joining you this afternoon from Guelph, Ontario, which sits on the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. I work at the University of Guelph as the Liberal Professor of Regional Economic Development, which in itself is a really innovative initiative between credit union and a number of donors in Southwestern Ontario to create this opportunity, but that's a topic for another day. For the past number of years, I've been actively working with charities and philanthropic organizations throughout Canada, and particularly in Atlantic Canada, where I used to be living in Newfoundland, but also in Nova Scotia. And we've been working with community organizations to try to better understand the realities and the challenges of charities and philanthropic organizations to support their communities and their regions. At the end of the day, all of these organizations are focused around supporting long-term prosperity. And as Cindy highlighted some of the work that community foundations are doing, Joni highlighted some of the work that's taking place in her neck of the woods. This afternoon, I wanted to share some insights from some current research we have on the go, but also some community voices, maybe from outside the Atlantic region, with regards to those two questions that Rosa highlighted in terms of connections and in terms of innovations. So in terms of the research that we have on the go, we have a multi-year project that is working with communities throughout Canada in rural communities, I should say. And we have kind of three big focus areas that we're looking at. The first is how can place-based endowments be re-embedded into those rural communities? Because we've often thought of rural places as being maybe poor cousins to the urban areas. And so how do we think about collecting wealth through mechanisms that Cindy described, like endowments, so that they stay in that place where they were raised, so that they can be reinvested in local priorities and to support long-term planning. So we've been trying to figure out how does this work in a number of different communities. We're also keenly interested in understanding how public policy either facilitates, and I was very polite on the slide and didn't put hinder, but how public policy also hinders the ability for communities to take advantage of this endowment strategy to enhance their long-term prosperity. And finally, we're also interested in understanding how philanthropy and the ability to collect this wealth, to reutilize this wealth within their communities might actually change our understanding of how we do local economic and community development, because we're no longer thinking of small towns as being cash poor. They actually have, as Cindy alluded to, a large amount of financial resources at their discretion. And the question is, how might they use that, and how might that change the dynamic between governments and between our regions? So this research is ongoing, and we could chat a lot about it, but I know a number of my colleagues have shared some of their parts of this throughout the program yesterday. But we can talk at length of this, and happy to have another conversation if this is of interest for anybody on the call. But going back to the first question for this session, and I'm channeling my inner Jan Brady here, connections, connections, connections. And the philanthropic organizations we've been working with are guided by dedicated volunteers that are well embedded and well invested in their communities. And this strengthens the work that they're doing, ensuring that their activities make a difference to the communities that they are serving. What's important to recognize is that philanthropic organizations are one of many local and regional actors that are striving to enhance the long-term prosperity of their community. There are businesses, chambers of commerce, there are nonprofit organizations, faith-based communities, all that operate in the same geographical area that often have many similar or overlapping priorities. And so the question that often emerges and the challenge is, who's connecting all of these different actors together within the same physical space? And there are a number of challenges to this that you can well imagine that have already been noted by Joni and by Cindy. One is human resources. Often philanthropic organizations have limited human resources in terms of staff. Many have no staff. And so then it becomes a responsibility of volunteers that are already doing a lot of work for these organizations. And so all of the good work that's happening sometimes can be limited by the lack of forums. That's the second challenge that often people have raised, is that there really isn't a table to sit at, or a proverbial table to connect all of these different actors together. Because historically, they've often thought of themselves as being quite separate: economic development, business development, charitable and philanthropic development, and not necessarily saw a connection between them. But I think Cindy alluded to it really nicely, that community foundations are seeing themselves as a catalyst for change. And this is something that many philanthropic organizations are also looking towards, as are all of the other actors. So there is this opportunity to find ways to create forums and meaningful connections to bridge the multiple actors in these communities. There is also that potential we hear many times about overlap between philanthropic activities and the work of other groups and other organizations. And it's not that one is trying to steal the wind out of a sail of another, but rather just kind of serendipitously, they both identified a really good priority, both identified some strategies, but didn't realize the other was also doing the same work. There's also a common thing that people and philanthropic organizations have passed along to us in this research is the potential for missed opportunities because of the lack of collaboration, where there are a series of activities that are ongoing that are complementary, but there was no opportunity to connect the dots. And one example that was presented was work that a nonprofit environmental group was doing with the local schools around increasing environmental education and water stewardship. And the local philanthropic organization saying, we actually have a fund dedicated to supporting environmental protection and stewardship activities, that if they had been more proactive, there could have been an opportunity to combine the two activities, or at least allowing one group to feed into the other group, so that greater benefits could be gathered by those communities at the end of the day. So we've seen some examples of this collaboration taking place, where regional actors are coming together. One of my favorite examples that was shared is just simply around fundraising. And it was the fact that many groups are actually doing fundraising to the same audience at the same time. And it's not that they're trying to compete with the other organizations, but rather there was simply no communication around when those activities are taking place. So connections are absolutely a priority for moving forward. The other question that was posed was around innovative stories or innovative practices. And the amount of innovation that is taking place in the philanthropic sector absolutely surprises me and motivates me. I'm always shocked at how much is taking place. But the other thing that's really important for us to grapple with is that many communities often downplay their innovations. They often get missed. And so when you ask an organization if they're doing anything innovative, they often say, no, they're not. And it's not because they're not doing it, but rather the innovations that they're doing, they simply consider it as getting things done, or the way they do things. And they don't see themselves as being an innovator or doing innovative things. And so we need to ensure that we don't miss these innovative practices, because they're incredibly important and they build a significant amount of momentum. In the last minute here that I've got, I want to share just one quick story of a group that embodies both the innovation and the connections. And that comes out of the Huron County in southwestern Ontario. This is a predominantly rural region. And in this region, they actually have no community foundation operating within the geographical area, although there are other regional foundations that do provide coverage. But in this particular region, they wanted to explore a partnership between economic development, the local government, and the philanthropic sector. And so they've created, or are creating, I should say, it's still in the process, an opportunity to build this relationship between the Community Futures Development Corporation, which in Atlantic Canada would be the Community Business Development Centers, the CBDCs, with the philanthropic sector and the local government, whereby they are looking at opportunities to provide training and capacity development supports for entrepreneurship and leadership development, bridging that into existing programs that exist within the Business Development Service Center to provide small grants and loans to support business expansion or new businesses to emerge, which ultimately are going to benefit the broader community by ensuring there are jobs and opportunities there. So it's a really innovative story that connects the philanthropic, the economic development, the local development to benefit the broader community. But I'm going to leave it at that. There's more information at that website if you're interested, but I look forward to both the upcoming presentation and any questions that people have.